All right, morning everybody, and welcome to Strategy Cafe. Really lovely to see you all. As you know, this is our regular leadership strategy webinar. So if this is your first time here, I really encourage you to check out our YouTube channel. I've given a little screenshot there at the bottom of the welcome slide. Hopefully you can see that. Just head over to Alembic Strategies YouTube channel. There's loads of these sessions on there. So for example, in April, we had a fab discussion about power of creativity and problem solving with leadership coach and professional clown M. Stroud. In March, we tackled transformation from the perspective of self, team and organization. Prior to that, we had future Mayor of London, Lord Mayor of London, Alison Gowman on talking about climate change, ESG and transformation in the city. So it's a real kind of smorgasbord of topics. There's lots to discover on the channel, so just head over there. Thinking out loud. You know, as a leader, you could easily pick one of these sessions. They are free and there's good content on there. You could share it with your team. That might prompt a discussion on that theme or that content. So good resources for you to use in developing your leadership and management teams. Before we get going, then our next one, we're going to move on from creativity and today's subject, which is happiness, to something much harder. The next session, which I think Alice will correct me, is the 30th of June. We'll confirm the date on a later slide. It's about how to face the difficult things in our lives and how, as leaders, facing the difficult things in our lives is key to growing as leaders. So a little bit more on that later. All right, before we get started, I'm keen just to get a view from everybody on what you think about employee happiness, given our guests today. So I'm just going to launch a poll just can everyone just pile in and give us a yes, no on that. Most of you don't think employee happiness is a fluffy metric. A few of you do. So very interesting. That's useful for us. So we'll take both points of view into account as we get going. Right, so delighted to have Chris and Clive Hyland here from Happiness Index. Hi, Chris. I think you're going to kick off and just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and about Happiness Index.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me. So I am Chris Hyland, the younger Hyland. I'm the co-founder of the Happiness Index. I have been on my entrepreneurial journey since 26, so 14 years now. And we founded the Happiness Index, which is an employee and happiness platform, 7 years ago now. And one big factor we brought into it, hence why my dad is here, is around neuroscience and actually how we quantify that happiness metric. So we work with companies to help create thriving cultures, and we do that through our platform.
Lovely to have you. Hello, Clive.
Morning. Hi, Nick, and everyone else. You'll have great difficulty in spotting which is the younger of us, of course, but we'll press on anyway. My role really, I mean, my corporate career was built really in leadership roles in fairly large organizations. So about 30 years of business experience, and that ended in about 2005 when I started down this route of neuroscience, discovered partly by accident, but nevertheless. And it helped me to make sense of both the experience I'd had in the corporate world and also what I believe needs to be done by organizations and by people in the future. So, my passion met with Chris and his business's passion. And at this stage, we're on the same track in terms of bringing subjects like happiness to the business table. So we'll see where the conversation goes.
I remember when we were chatting, Chris, you talked about this a little bit and about, asking people how they are, I think, so tell us a little bit about that. It was a curious way that people respond to the how are you question.
So I think it originally came from, starting my career about 20 years ago, the thought of asking me or someone in the company, are you happy today? It was just unthinkable. It was much more kind of like corporate focused questions, or do you feel like you're developing the company, for instance? So when we started our first agency, when we were 26, that was a people business. So as we got bigger and bigger, we found that ultimately you got the truthful answers from people when you just said to them, are you happy? And actually, it's quite funny at the time, because this is probably 10, 15 years ago now. when you actually ask people, are you happy? Like, are you happy within your role? Are you happy at work? I think there's an element of shock to that response first, which is, am I happy? Like, oh, and then if something goes deep inside and you get a real emotive answer. So we found straight away that you can ask lots of these different questions around personal development and, do you feel like you're being pushed here, for instance? But when we actually asked the question, do you feel happy at work? We found we got a much more emotive answer. And of course, that is where the idea started to come around about asking these types of questions on a more of a regular basis.
I think that's so interesting. So really simple flip from how are you to are you happy?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just getting, it's a very, very kind of subtle kind of flip. And then you suddenly get this search for the answer. I'm not sure how to answer that. Am I happy?
Yeah.
Such an interesting thing. I wonder with everyone listening in, if you can pile in the chat, is that a question that you've ever thought of asking? How would you feel about asking your team, are you happy? Just, would you feel worried that they might not be and, concerned to take that answer? And what would you do with that? So put stuff in your chat. Clive, you talked about, I think, the neurobiology. Is that right? Have I got that right? And
Yeah, we can refer to it in a number of terms, but you and myself, Nick, are in the game of trying to bring a very complex subject in an accessible way to a wider audience, because we believe in it. We choose the language that we think helps with that. So I talk generally about neuroscience, and the link there with what Chris said is that in organizations, traditional organizations have known each other. People within that business know each other through what they do rather than through who they are. And what what the science tells us is, if you want to get the best out of people, you really need to understand who they are and what they're capable of bringing to the table. So this takes us down a whole new route of trying to understand where people are, particularly emotionally, because again, the science tells us we are driven by our emotions. Yeah. And a lot of people will have a reaction to that. It may not feel the case, but we can track, the reaction chain in the brain, and we know that we react, as you will know, emotionally before we react in any cognitive sense.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, focuses on things like purely behavior, I think, are misplaced, because behavior itself is a product of this other chain of instincts, emotions, and thoughts, which actually, manifest themselves in behavior. So if you want to influence how people, act in an organization, you need to get beyond pure behavior and look at what lies beneath.
I love that. One of my favorite, I can't remember the name of this bias. One of my favorite biases is the assumption that somebody else has a simple mind. So the way you would kind of express that is, I know what she's thinking. That would be like a classic way that you'd express this bias. Whereas when we consider ourselves, we quite often don't know how we are. We don't know what we think about things. We know that we ruminate a lot about stuff. If you take a moment to delve inwards into your own mental experiences, it's really complex. Absolutely. I don't think anyone would say it's not that complex in here. Yeah. But then you kind of make this immediate assumption. I know what she's thinking. I think she's fine. I know what he's thinking. I think he's got a real problem. And your point, I think, is just to sort of start with a lovely emotional question and then take it from there. Find out, right? I think that's what you're saying. Why don't we find out?
Yeah. Well, if that's what drives us, that's a good place to start our inquiry, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I really love it. Now I've got this next slide to share, which is from you guys. Let me just see if I can get this shared correctly. So is our vision slide come up?
Yep, that's right.
Oh, so yeah. So I think this is just a beautiful slide. I love the way you've summarized this. And I think people I know in the audience will really align with some of the stuff on here. But for me, this is kind of a way of encapsulating how to be with people to find out about them. There are some key things here which allow you to ask those questions. So maybe you can just talk about this. This is obviously a key slide for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is our guide and light in the business, really. I mean, if I go back a little bit, when we used to ask the questions around, do you feel happy at work or are you happy? That was never really based on any science back then. It was based just on a belief that if your employees are happy at work, that's going to be positive. It was simple as that. But when we started the business, we found that a few years in, the challenge we faced was you could only really work with believers, but you couldn't work with non-believers. So that's where we started to face the challenge around, okay, what's the science behind this? And hence the conversations with my dad began. And really what we so our vision is all about freedom to be human, which is, really simply, in order for you, a human, to thrive at work, you need to be your true self. But actually we've measured that in 8 different metrics. And there's 2, to break it down in layman's terms, there's 2 key components. So if I'm an employer of a company, for me to feel like I'm really thriving, the first bit is the brain bit, which is very much around engagement. We call employee engagement, which is around clear direction, enablement to succeed, aligning meaning and purpose, and opportunities to grow. If I feel like I have all these opportunities within the company, I'm going to be in a really good place and engaged. The challenge is in the industry for the last 5, 6 plus years, that's maybe been the only piece that's been measured, but they've been missing the piece around the heart. And that's what we call the happiness part, which is the psychological safety. It's those relationships, positive relationships. It's freedom to have opportunities. Do I feel like I can progress here? And probably a key one, which we see in our data a lot, especially in the last few years, is feelings of acknowledgement. Or with some of our customers, sometimes it's the lack of. They're just growing so fast, always looking forward. Sometimes they just forget to stop and reflect and acknowledge people. So that is just a rough idea around what our vision is at the Happiness Index. And I'm sure, Dad, you can add some neuroscience perspective on it as well.
Yeah, I can pick that up. These are not just dreamed up for the sake of it. It all links back really to what I would describe as 4 behavioral systems in the brain. You may call them brain types or brain, mind types, whatever. But basically, there are these 4 systems in the brain that have a significant impact on the way that we behave. And in the everyday world, we recognize those as, the instinctive system, the emotional system, the rational system, and the reflective system. And again, we can track how they light up in the brain, through imaging technology. So we're pretty certain about this stuff. And it's recognizing how each of those impacts our behavior. And this isn't a matter of choice. We don't choose to have an instinctive style or an emotional style. It's what our brains have learned through our lives. So we are a process, and we are constantly in places where we've learned to react in certain ways in certain situations rather than other ways. So just as one example, somebody with an emotional style is much more likely to wear their heart on their sleeve, and to need strong relationships, etc. Whereas somebody with a more rational style is probably more naturally inclined towards data and evidence. So we go into this sort of stuff. But the whole point of this is if we can, maintain that understanding of the brain and the wider intelligence system of the body, because it's not just the brain, then that means we're on an authentic path to understanding people at a deeper level. We couldn't do this in the last century, the foundations of psychology, because we didn't have the imaging technology. But now we do. And it does throw up these fundamental insights that perhaps weren't understood and certainly weren't reinforced enough, by previous approaches, and certainly in terms of leadership of businesses. So this bringing to the table, this understanding the way that the brain works and laying it bare, and it's a great opportunity then to understand the state of our business, which means the state of our people.
But also this is in layman's terms, isn't it? Like the whole point in this is that, our audience are C-level people, CEOs, CPOs, HRDs. Sometimes neuroscience can be a bit scary to them, or anything with science in is a bit always daunting, where people can resonate with this. And I'm sure either people on the call or people who work with have employees in the business, there's always going to be elements which these are really important, or it's not thinking, actually, we haven't actually thought of that aspect.
Oh yeah, just jump in. So just very quickly from a neuroscience perspective, I think kind of share that and validate kind of your comments there from my own studies. And Clive, I think we both know from the kind of reactive system that the instinct system doesn't even pass through your your cognitive thought process. It's like straight to body, like an injection of adrenaline. It's like straight away. So I think John might be on the call today. It's the thinking fast and slow, the sort of Daniel Kahneman type thing. But the second one, the sort of psychological stress response, which is I think the technical term for it, does go through your mind. But even that it's not, but it's quite quick.
Yes.
And so I mean, both of them too fast for any of us to know that we're having that reaction, and they are both pre-thinking, right? So the instinctive response and the emotional response are so quick you wouldn't know you'd even had them.
Yes.
You know, they've happened before you can think about them, really.
Yeah. And just, just to reinforce that, we won't overdo the science, but we register an emotion in the brain within 80 milliseconds, whereas a thought is.
That's the slow one, right?
Yeah. No, 80, the emotion is the quick one. And then we've got the 250 milliseconds to register a thought. Now, that may seem to people, well, they're all split seconds, but in brain terms, that's hugely significant. So it means that any cognitive process is reacting to the emotions that are already occurring. So any notion that we're not driven by our emotions is misplaced. We've learned strategies for trying to deal with them and control them and negotiate with them. Of course we do, but don't ever fool ourselves to think we're in control emotionally, because we're not. Why would we ever get upset otherwise? We'd simply say, I don't want to be upset, and move on. And we tried to do that, but we know it doesn't work. Sorry, Nick, I think you wanted to say something more.
Oh, no, it's good. That's really cool. And I think that's right. So I think all we ever really have is more or less emotion, and emotion is fundamentally how we engage with the world. So I think this is a really important point that you're making, that by bringing the whole idea, the concept of happiness into mainstream, you're generally bringing emotion into mainstream at C-suite level, and getting us to think about that. And I think, my take on this is that, people are, more or less frightened about the strong emotions that they can feel. We all know that we can lose control when the intensity of it is high, and because of that we avoid this area of life, and so we never know it. We don't learn to know our emotional world very well in ourselves or in others, and it's a different channel of experience, as you say. I was just really curious, I think, just for people looking at this slide, I think if you kind of go through these words on here as leaders and just score yourself in your organization just in your head quietly. So out of 10, clear direction, how you going? Aligned meaning and purpose, out of 10, where 10 would be good as it could be, how you going? Providing your key people, everyone maybe, with opportunities for growth, out of 10, how you going? What do you think about opportunities, freedom to take opportunity, out of 10, again, how you going? Do you acknowledge, is that your habit, your reflex? Is that automatic in you? Do you have that behavior in your management team? Are you acknowledging? Again, out of 10, how you going? What do you say about positive relationships at work? Out of 10, how you going? You're enabling people to succeed. I think this last one, I think is just so fundamental. If people are frightened, they won't open up. It's like a protective shell that we wear when we don't feel safe. It's, again, automatic. So creating this sense of psychological safety, I know it's kind of a bit of a buzzword, but it's really allowing people to feel confident enough to open up to you. And I would say that's almost like opening up here. It's like, hello, so I'm going to be friendly. Come on, let's talk. So it's very much opening up vulnerability. All of this is all very vulnerable. So you have to have that sense of safety and not a sense of threat and defensiveness. And I think so, again, out of 10 with your management team, do they feel threatened, or do you create a great sense of psychological safety so you can get into the detail? I think it's such a great slide. So I got a question here, so happiness then, is that enough, do you think? Should we just be focusing on happiness? Is it okay to be unhappy?
I mean, absolutely. One thing that we've done, as you would imagine, looked into a lot of happiness, because we've had a lot of questions and a lot of objections from people in the past. Ultimately we have a data-led platform, and sometimes people are like, well, I like it all, but happiness is not quite right. And I think our journey is, we're called the Happiness Index. So, when we first started that business, our journey was, why are you asking all these corporate questions? It doesn't matter. Like, it's just all about happiness. But actually, we came to find that you can't just ask happiness. And actually, in order to create a thriving culture, you need to tick those 4 brain types. You need to energize the rational and reflective people, but also the instinctive and emotional people. And of course, happiness, it's an interesting one, because what we do within our platform and how companies work with us is everything's based on a score. So at the end of your first cultural assessment, measuring those aspects, you would have identified where in the business you're doing really well and where you need to improve. But we also say that, the score is really good and it's good to try and push that forward. But also sometimes it's just understanding how your people feel and just accepting that. So we say happiness is not something which can be sustained over long term. It's much more of a trying to understand how your people feel and then trying to move them forward in the right direction, which, as we say from a neuroscience perspective, is trying to get the best out of you individually. So kind of a bit of a long-winded answer, but we can't just focus on happiness, unfortunately, even though we thought that a few years ago.
I love it though. I think if you'd called yourself the unhappiness index, for example, right? So there's a sort of nominative determinism about the name you've chosen, and if we're going to go for let's find out how you're feeling, I feel it makes sense, right, to start with kind of a title like that.
Yeah.
Let's start on that side of the scale and make people feel comfortable about it to start with, and then let's open up and say, actually, no, I'm unhappy. Behind my question was this kind of experience that I have of variability. As soon as you get into emotional states which are stuck, I think you might be kind of worrying about whether you've got kind of a problem, because we're for the scientists in the audience, it's tonic versus chronic, right? So tonicity is a good thing. So finding things really difficult, getting frustrated, ruminating about how to solve the problem, breaking through, having an aha moment, feeling amazing about it. I'm not sure happiness is any of the emotions I've described there. Probably difficulty, frustration, hardship, inspiration, excitement would be words I might use. But then does that mean I'm happy, not happy? I think maybe happiness describes something a bit more long lasting, or more of a kind of a general mood state. But that variability is a really important part of the component of feeling happy. So I think it's complicated, this. Do you agree, or do you want to challenge me on that?
No, I totally agree, Nick. I think, part of this is a change of mindset that people need to have, around linear measurement. Typically surveys in the past have, pulled out their statistics. They want to find out what their score out of 10 is, and they want to map forward some linear progress, go from 7 out of 10 to 8 out of 10. That's not what this is about. Absolutely, we want to improve, but you cannot rely on linear measurement because emotions are not linear. They're all about ups and downs. If you look at the fundamental heartbeat itself, this whole principle of heart rate variability absolutely demonstrates this fact, and what we're trying to do here is simply say, look, emotions drive our people. So now we have the tools to start looking at how we can best manage the emotional health of business. I think part of the reluctance in the past, and why people in my generation were very much encouraged to leave their emotions at home, was that the managers in those businesses didn't know how to deal with them, and neither did anybody else. Yeah. So there was a case of, we'll keep them aside and then we're not accountable for them. And the whole paradigm around corporate organizations has been around hierarchy and control. Yeah. Both hierarchy and control actually diminish us as people. They put us in a box. And the reality is that we are energetic systems that flow, that shouldn't be constrained by boxes. So there's a whole principle here of sort of think, what is the actual natural state, and how do we capture that in organizations? And it's fundamental, I would argue, that leaders of organizations understand what they're dealing with in their business. Yeah. So it's not getting, if there's if you've just announced a corporate restructuring, for instance, do you honestly think people are going to be happy in that business? But the point is, you need to know how it's impacting them. So, yes. Feedback that tells you things are not right is not necessarily bad information.
It's vital.
It's telling you where to react, because, today's emotions are tomorrow's performance.
I love it.
That's what you're going to see on the P&L and the balance sheet later.
I love it.
We've constantly skirted around that, and now we're saying there's no need to keep doing that now, because we can create, more natural environments and organizations where people can be themselves, and that is not a fluffy metric.
I love it. I think so. You've given us perfect segue into our next session, which is the challenge of choice.
And I'm here to make your job easier, Nick.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So to this point, when people are emotional, a lot of people will run from that. They just will run from the experience of collective emotion, rather than saying what is happening now. Let's everyone just slow down and let's hear. And I think it's so important a skill to be able to stay with the difficulty. You can sense the emotion, as you say, we're energetic system, so we instantly know when the emotions have gone, and then we run away from it or we attack it. You know, we have the fight flight response in ourselves. So monitoring that in self and then just saying, okay, I'm going to sit with this, which is a very kind of mindful way of thinking about it. Tell me what that is. I want to know what you're safe. I know you're feeling. Tell me. And being brave enough to ask that question, which is a similar thing to being brave enough to say, are you happy? And maybe someone would say, no, I'm not. And that, I think instantly there we take the fluffiness away, right? Because it's actually opened up to the possibility of it not being okay. And people being okay to tell you that. I think it's such a wonderful thing. I want to just give people a chance to have a look at your 4 layers of data and the 4 minds. So I'm going to go to that slide, which you mentioned earlier, but let's share this because I think it's so brilliant. It's very closely aligned with our thinking. So here, I think this is the slide. Tell me if is the share come up?
That's it, yeah.
Yeah. So who wants to take this? I think this is such a lovely paradigm.
Well, I guess I can do it in simple terms. and any real science, you can speak to my dad. But I guess, so as you can see, even the way we've designed it here, we wanted to keep it as layman as possible. Because again, it's with that caveat that when you talk to people about brain types, for instance, some people might be like, just shut down because there's a bit too much science. But ultimately, there's 4 brain types, and what we've learned in the last few years is that everybody has, everyone has. It's not like someone has a preference brain type. So I will be more of a reflective person, but in different situations, I could fall into different guises. So instinctive is basically something which you just act straight away. So sometimes when I want to speak to a staff member, I'll call them up and say, can I get an instinctive response? What do you think about this? I put them on the spot straight away. Give us a sense how you feel. Emotional, someone in my team, when I say emotional, which is they really like stories. They really like to understand the context and the story behind it.
Yeah.
Reflective is, which I can be sometimes. I've trained myself to be a bit more instinctive. But reflective would be like, actually, sometimes I just need to give my brain some headspace to process information and think about the feelings after. And rational is, I guess, again, in my perspective, is the detail element. So here's a plan. We're going to go to the moon. Okay, great. How are we actually going to do that? Well, this is the detail. So again, that's my layman's version of the 4 brain types.
Oh, wonderful. So just going out to the audience again, just have a look at that that kind of grid there with the 4 brain types. I wonder, if each of you think, you kind of dominantly one of those. Are you emotional? Are you instinctive? Do you think you're dominantly rational? How good are you at reflection? I think that's such a great question to ask everyone. How good are you at reflection?
And Nick, one thing that we've again, the most important thing about all of this is there's absolutely no judgment. Like even that word emotional in the past had negative connotations, and it still does now, at home or in business. It's not about that. And I think actually it's totally changed the way that we operate within our business. We have 40 people, and it's just actually understanding that you can communicate with people in a more effective way. Like if I know someone's instinctive, I just give them the headlines. If I know someone's reflective, I give them the information and I come back to them at different times. So I think that's where it's helped us massively. And even in my home life, of just understanding, when you understand people's preference or brain type, it allows me to adapt to them more as well.
I completely agree with that. And I think you're right. I think emotional does have a bit of stigma attached to it. You're too emotional, etc. Really, though, that has happened, I think, from what we were saying earlier on about people being worried about the loss of control that can happen with high intensity and therefore not knowing the emotional mind, not knowing it well. But if you think about a great singer, they won't lose control, but they'll bring emotion and passion out in the audience, right?
Yeah.
Great leadership. Sometimes you need to reach for your charisma box and, bring people with you. So for me, this is the power channel. And of course, if you put the power up too much, it could blow. So that's the way of thinking about this. I think it's the power channel, and the rational mind is maybe more the clarity detail channel, right? So That's the way we would frame it. And I think it's so important for leaders to understand and live inside the emotional channel well, because how are they going to handle it? Right? Because in the end, that is where deals are done. They're done in the power channel. You know, you get all the reflective, rational stuff all out written down on paper. You know, it's either gut or emotion that makes you make the decision, right? So it's so important.
So one of the facts that I regularly quote is 95% of our behavior is driven subconsciously, you know, and that includes decisions that we make. People assume that we refer to data and evidence and are driven by that, but really at a subconscious level, we're already deciding which pieces of data we are looking for, sometimes simply to confirm our prejudices. And that drives the cognitive process that then follows. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff behind this, and it really sort of says, look, you know, we've run out of time now in terms of simply focusing on the cognitive stuff that comes later in the brain. And what we need to do is get into this stuff, you know, which is our initial reaction, the instinctive and emotional stuff. And the only other point I want to make about the brain types, as Chris called them, is that, look, the brain is a highly integrated system. You know, we're not trying to box people off and saying you're one of them and you're not any of the others. You know, we move very quickly between these styles. But what we're trying to do is raise awareness of what's going on in here so we can make better choices as to how we respond. And that's part of that process, you know. So there's a distinct situational element. You know, we're not, if we're emotional style, we're not emotional in every situation.
No.
It's like raising our game and raising our understanding of other people. Because if we can connect in the right space and we know to talk to the different preferences, then we up our game as teams and as communities.
I think that's a lovely way of putting it. I mean, everyone, I think, will recognize that even in a meeting, one can start off reflective, rational, and suddenly find something happens that makes us highly aroused and we become emotional, instinctive, right? So we'll all know that. And I think it's quite interesting to say, well, if someone is asking a question from the emotional channel of themselves, maybe giving them a rational answer isn't what they need. They maybe need to be met emotionally first. You know, so I think knowing that as a leader is a really key kind of nuance. I'm not, you know, maybe giving a rational response here is the wrong way to go here. Maybe I need to stop and check and say, look, I see you. I hear what you're feeling. You know, let's talk about that. And
just a very simple example of that to make it relatable. You're in a meeting, somebody, let's say with an emotional style, you know, could be excited about something that's said, and they sat next to somebody with a rational style. And they'll turn to them, you know, and sort of be excited. And what do you think about that? And they're looking for immediate response. The more rationally oriented person will think they're in my face, and they'll move back, you know, try to create space so they can process it. What happens then is that the rational person feels they've been challenged too strongly, and the emotional person feels they haven't been acknowledged. So they don't bother. In the future, they just withdraw to neutral corners, and they miss the opportunity for connection. So
we say that it's like two radio channels, and
absolutely.
You got the wrong channel on.
Yeah, two languages. Yeah, precisely that. They're all they're great analogies to try and make it relatable for people.
Chris, you want to come in there?
No, I'm just listening.
Okay, so look, just interested as we wrap up on this part. I've got some great questions, and I want to engage everyone around the questions as well. You know, we had some really good comments from Steve about context being critical to the choices that we make. John talking about adapting our style, but maybe they're relatable also to, you know, the fundamental traits, the ocean traits that we talked about, you know, openness, conscientiousness, etc. Some really good comments in there about that. So you go have a look at the chat. But while you're doing that, and feel free to pick up on any of these points that people are raising. We'll turn the recording off and bring people live so we can have this chat in a bit. But some great points there. I'm just curious as we wrap up on the content from you guys. I mean, thank you very much for this. It's been super interesting. Have you both got like one or two key? What was your favorite client project out of your data? What was your favorite thing that someone has done this year to sort of really flip the paradigm in their organization, having looked at your data and engaged with Happiness Index? Just, you know, what are people doing that works?
Well, I think the one that instinctively came to mind was I was with a customer about 6 weeks ago, virtually, obviously in a new world, and we were presenting back to them the results of their culture assessment, and their scores are actually really good. They're a fast-growing business, 500 people, but the scores that scored the least were around inspiration, which is something you wouldn't really think about measuring in the past. And I think the general consensus from the data was that people felt loyal to be there. They were committed to the cause, but they weren't inspired. And for us, that's the next step to creating that thriving culture. So they were kind of working hard, but they had the opportunity to go to that next level. And I think that's been a challenge in the industry the last couple of years, particularly since COVID. People, professionals will always work hard. They will always be committed to the cause. But for them to perform at their best level and to be their true self, they need a bit more than that. So that's one that sprung to mind.
That's lovely. So kind of connecting sense of purpose here, whole purpose.
Yeah.
And I remember a McKinsey article on happiness, a study on this, said actually what really drives the additional level of performance is the two. There's a measurement of high levels of happiness and high levels of engagement with purpose at the same time. I don't know where that study was now. I remember that though.
For myself, I'll answer it in a slightly more generic way because it's a pattern that I've observed, with the clients that I'm working on this stuff. And obviously today's session has been more than neuroscience stuff, but we also talk about quantum principles as well, which is more to do with energetic flow and things like that. But basically the starting point, and this may be useful for the audience, I think is inevitably going to start in two areas. When you're trying to bring about this change of approach, which sometimes is enforced because the people in the business can see that it's no longer working. And sometimes it comes about through some sort of inspiration of a new leader. But essentially, it's about two things. One is about the vision. It really is about setting out this new direction and, making that vision relatable. The happiness index talk about the freedom to be human. And they've put a lot of conversation into what that means so that people can relate to it. And it does provide a sense of direction. And then secondly, it's about building trust. We have to trust not only people's intentions, but their talents and their habits. And there's a lot of work to do to take people to a new trust level. And again, the science is incredibly strong. When we feel in a place where we feel trusted, in other words, we feel safe, we are ready to genuinely engage, to emotionally engage and give what we are, as opposed to being in survival mode and just giving what we have to. We are built and designed to go out and perform. It is a natural state because we want to perform so we get acknowledgement and I get a sense that we're on the right path. And for far too long, we've denied people that opportunity. We've tried to do it despite the organizational hierarchy. Hierarchy and control kills off creativity and it kills off motivation. So, this is all part of a fundamental change to say, let's start the process of creating natural organizations that allow us to be our best. And let's do that in a way that starts with data, which tells us what's really going on now.
That's wonderful. So we get a lovely kind of tune in there to the passion behind it all. And thank you very much for that. Right, guys, I'm going to bring the audience in a second. I'll just a couple of slides to wrap up, and then let's take some of the questions for those who can stay for a little. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to me, Chris, and Clive from the Happiness Index talk about the power and importance of bringing emotion more fully into the frame in business and being brave enough to ask those emotional questions of your team. And that lovely paradigm there from Clive about, finding the right balance between command and control and transformational leadership style, I guess, is what we're talking about here. So a more organic organization where there's more freedom to be. I guess the question here for everyone, what's the one thing? I always like to finish with that. So, if you found today useful, if something has inspired you, what is the one thing you're actually going to do? Right? You've got cognitive space for at least one. So put something in there. Here are the contact details. So if you want to find out more about Happiness Index, you can get Chris. There's his email address, and Clive at Try Making Sense. And then there's the Happiness Index website. So go take a look and connect. And I'm sure the guys will be delighted to talk to you more and maybe come and talk to you and your teams about this. Thank you both very, very much. These slides will obviously be around shortly after the session, and the recording will be up online. And then just next one, I got the date right. Hey, so leading yourself, the challenging choice with us. So as leaders, we regularly face ambiguity. In these situations, those that lead, they're looking for clarity, right? People are looking for clarity when things become ambiguous because it's uncomfortable. So that's emotion, right? So this can be a challenge, and when we're feeling that discomfort that comes from facing uncertainty, right? So we can feel emotional, it can be difficult. We're in unfamiliar territory, we're without that map. When things are ambiguous, what should leaders do and how? So that's the next session. All right. So we're really talking about facing your difficult, facing your challenge, facing your hard, and learning from that. So it should be an incredible session. Nice one to finish the season off on, and register after this, and we hope to see you on for the next one. There you go. Oh yeah, by the way, there is an article on this subject on our website. There's a nice little screenshot there from Alice to show you where you can go find it. So a lovely article there from Rosanna, which talks about the challenging choice and facing your hard and stepping out of the comfort zone.
Thank you for listening to our Strategy Cafe. We hope you enjoyed the discussion. Do feel free to share this recording with others that you think may find it interesting. You can register for our next Strategy Cafe on our website, alembicstrategy.com, in the Get Involved section. We hope to see you online.